In this episode, we will discuss one of the strategies that is aimed at creating value. And although this strategy at a first glance doesn't seem to be very directly linked to M&As, but indeed it is part of the overall strategy of the company, and sometimes it is used specifically in some M&A issues. This is the idea of a share repurchase. What is it? So we talk about share repurchases. So this is a cash offer for outstanding common stock. For some shares. Well, the first question is, why would a company buy back its own shares outstanding? One idea seems to be really doubtful. Let's say if the company believes that the stock of the company is now undervalued, so for some reason the investors, they do not put enough value to this company's stock, then maybe the company buys it back at this quoted low price. And then something happens, and then hopefully in the future this stock goes up in price, and therefore this is the idea of supporting the price of the stock of the company. Well, sometimes it does work, but it doesn't seem to be a very creative way, because some people can say, well, something bad is going on with the company, and they're just trying to create some artificial demand for this stock by buying it back. Still, there are some classic examples of successful share repurchase programs, and I will quote just two very well known, although they're kind of old. So first was the share repurchase of IBM stock that happened in 1995 to 98. And that was worth of about $24 billion. Now the key story was that over this period of time, the rate of return of the stock, or actually the growth rate, it's better to say, growth rate was about 50% a year. So it really produced a massive growth of the stock. And another example of maybe a greater scale of repurchase was the case of Coke that happened in 1982 to 1998 for 16 years. And that was a 24% reduction of the number of shares outstanding. And this is just a coincidence that over this period of time, the stock grew at a 24% compounded rate of return. So that was kind of two successful stories. And one of the ideas behind that, because clearly the question is why that happens. Why does the stock grow? And to quote just a few of these potential sources of value here, we can say that sometimes that's a signal of undervaluation, because the company does know, or at least in theory should know better, what is the value of its stock. Then at the same time, it shows that if the company goes ahead and buys that it prefers this project of a repurchase to some other projects. So that gives you an idea that the company believes that this repurchase project will be a positive NPV project, and therefore people believe that this is kind of a good one. And sometimes there's a very trivial sense in that when you use the repurchase program as an anti-takeover defense. Remember when we talked about these ways of persuading the target shareholders to sell, we said that sometimes the management can offer the repurchase of the stock to its own shareholders as a means of fending off the raider. So in what follows, I will give you some examples of how that is actually done. Remember, we said that in this week we are talking not only about what should be but how exactly it is done. And there are a couple of ways how people actually not only engage in these repurchases, but how they do these programs, and what exactly is done and how these programs result in some value creation. Well, there are many of them, and I will quote just fixed price tender offers, say a few words about Dutch auctions and transferable put rights, and then we'll wrap up this episode with the idea of an open market repurchase. Now, the most detailed will be the example of a fixed price tender offer. So this is basically when the company says, this is the amount I pay for each share of stock, and that's it. And the model goes like this. If P sub 0 and N sub 0, these are numbers before tender, this is the stock price and the number of shares. Then let's say PT is the tender price. That is the one that is offered by the company. And then after that, there are PE and ME. These are the numbers of shares outstanding and the price after the expiration of the tender. And the general idea is that what is after the tender, so this is the initial value, then this is the amount that is paid to the tendering shareholders, and then there is some wealth or value creation. And if you regroup this and divide by N sub 0 and P sub 0, you get that the relative value creation consists of the following parts. That you can check that. This is an easy regrouping. So this is the share of tendering shareholders, and this is the premium offered, the relative one. And this part is the share of holding shareholders, and this is what they may enjoy as a result of this value creation. Now, so this is the share tendered, This is the premium, and this is what is, so this is holding, and this is what is enjoyed by the holdings. And I will provide some example here. If this is 15%, and that can be measured. Now, if, let's say, the premium is 25%, and now the share of tendering is 20%, that means that share of remaining is 80%, and then from this equation, 15% is equal to 0.2 times 25% plus 0.8 times x, where x is the how much is being pocketed by the holding, by the remaining shareholders, by the ones holding. That means the ones who did not tender. So that gives you x of 12.5%. And here you can see, I will put it in red, that this is 5%. This is to tendering. And this is 10%. This is to holding. So that gives you an idea of a breakdown of this 15% value creation. Well, it's kind of a boring exercise, but it shows to you that if you do this tender offer, then part of the value created is being pocketed by the guys who do sell, and also if wealth is being created, then part of that goes to the ones who opt to hold. Now, like I said, there are also other approaches like Dutch auction. So basically the company says that you can tender at any price, but then the company collects all the bids and then buys back at the lowest one. Then there is also transferable put rights. So these are like put options that are distributed proratedly to the existing shareholders, and they can exercise these options and they are traded on the market. But what I would like to draw your attention to is the idea of open market repurchase. So this is basically when you go to the market and buy it at the price that is being offered in the market without making any specific announcements, without any specific auctions, without any specific tenders, whatever. You just go ahead and you buy it on the market like as if you were a regular potential buyer of this share of stock. And the interesting thing is that this approach, that seems to be the most expensive, that outnumbers in volumes all other approaches by an order of magnitude, by a factor of 10 to 1. Why is that so? So there must be some idea that if the company does not create any specific schemes, but instead goes to the market and buys it as a regular or as a buyer at large, that does not result in a growth of the price of the stock. Well, because the main idea here is this idea of a signaling. And clearly, the fact that the people know that the company is sort of underpriced, but instead of setting up special schemes, they go ahead and just buy it in the market. That results in the market sort of underreaction. So the growth of the stock. So because the people, this signal is more credible. They say that instead of trying to enjoy some kind of insider information in this or that way, these guys just went ahead and decided to buy the stock of this company as a good investment. And although that does result in the growth of the stock price, but it is not so prohibitively expensive. So it seems that this signaling effect is outweighing some other effects that are associated with an open market repurchase, and that is actually a very strong observation, because that is consistent with whatever we talked about in our capital markets course. Then we said that people really tend to trust these credible signals rather than words, or rather than just statements or some signals that are less credible. So without going deeper in this idea of a share repurchase, we see that this is the strategy that sometimes is a better choice and therefore is a positive NPV project that results in value creation. And we also said that in this case, it can send to the market some special signals, and as a result, some ways of doing this happen to be preferred by the market, and that in itself is consistent with the bigger picture. Now, in what follows, we will discuss the next big set of value creating strategies that are associated with anti-takeover defenses.